this morning. I expect people are still coming in after the little bit of snow we received last night. Personally, I'm tired of shoveling. I'd be happy if it just stopped for a while. But forecast isn't too good. It looks like we may even be getting some rain late tonight, so we'll see. But please be careful out there driving and just getting around. So I'm very thankful that you're here this morning. I'd like to ask maybe just to help our mindset, get us ready for studying. Let's go to God in prayer first and take a moment just to settle in. I'll let Betty get to her seat first, though. Okay, if you would join me in prayer. Our Father in heaven, we thank you so much for this time, Lord, that you've allowed us to be here, specifically to study your word, get into it, and to learn. We ask that you open our hearts and our minds, allow us the openness to, as we look at this, your message, that we can learn and apply it to our own lives, that it will help us also to understand you better. Lord, we're thankful that you have brought us here safely. We ask that throughout this day and even the week that you'll be with us, guide us, protect us as we go about our lives. We ask, Lord, that for those of our brothers and sisters that are ill or even shut in, that you'll be with them and care for them. Allow us also, Lord, to do the same. We thank you so much, Father, this time again. We pray in Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so if you've been in here, we're in Joshua. Today we are Joshua chapter 5, starting in verse 13 through chapter 6. Okay, so we got quite a bit there to cover and all. So if you want to open up, there is no PowerPoint, so open up, follow along with me. We're going to start at Joshua chapter 5, verse 13. So to recap a little bit, Joshua has taken over leadership. God has delivered them to the promised land. Okay, now this promised land, we say that all the time, but the promised land, they've been told this for hundreds of years. Remember all the way back to Abraham. Okay, the promised land. The Jews knew this. They looked forward to this. This was a part of their whole makeup for them as a nation, the promised land. And they were dependent on God for this. And this is a time when he is going to fulfill that promise. So he has brought them to the edge there, and as we saw last week, they crossed over the Jordan, and they are ready. They are ready. They are ready for battle. They're ready to begin a new life. This is a complete change. For 40 years, they have been wandering in a desert, defending themselves, relying on God for food, for water, for their general care and needs. Okay, can you imagine yourself wandering for 40 years? I mean, honestly, if you look at it, look at your age, and how long you've been alive, young or old, and then compare that to 40 years. What have you done in the past 40 years? I lived in Alaska. Okay. Yeah, I'm almost there too. But think of yourself every day. Amount of time you've spent going to work, going to school, having a family, whatever it may be. Compare that to the Israelites who have been wandering, okay, marching, traveling, carrying all of their goods with them, okay, and not to a destination. Because if you remember, the first time they got to that destination, they lost their faith and made God mad, and he said, nope, back in the desert with you. You've made me so angry that you're not going to get what I told you I was going to give you now. Now, does that sound familiar? Have we ever done that as parents, maybe? We've told our child they can have something, and then after they've pitched a big fit, had a tantrum or something, we've said, you know what? I told you could have that, but you don't get it right now. And that's how God is treating the Israelites, his children. All right, so now, as we get into chapter 5, they have just crossed the Jordan. They're getting ready. It's a complete change. They've just seen the power of God. He has stopped. This time he hasn't divided the water. He has stopped the water and allowed them to travel over on dry land. But they're getting ready for battle. In front of them were the three tribes that had promised to help them out. They didn't have a stake in the future. They already had their land. Okay, but they were going to help out. So they're there to help guard, protect, and to conquer. All right, so we're going to start there. So they're across the Jordan now. They're in their encampment. They're getting ready. They know that the next thing is to start battle. Verse 13. When Joshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing before him with his drawn sword in his hand. Right there is a show of power, a drawn sword in his hand. Now this man seemingly appeared from nowhere. Joshua's scoping out what's happening for them as the commander, the leader of this Israel army. He's got to look around and see where he's going to send his forces and be ready. I mean, he's a man, a warrior himself, so he wants to see what's going to happen. Does this mean that he was not relying on God? No. But as a commander, as a leader, he needs to be prepared. So he's looking out. And Joshua went to him and said to him, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" And he said, "No." Now, if we stop right there, no. Which part is he answering? Are you for us or for our adversaries? No. Okay, that right there reads a lot. But I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come. What a statement. For this person just appear before him, sword in hand. I mean, I picture it myself as just an amazing sight. This is somebody that is ready for battle. He commands authority. And Joshua comes upon him, and the first question is actually a human one. Are you for us or for them? You know, obviously you look pretty powerful, so I want to know where you stand. Then that's when this man kind of lets the cat out of the bag, so to speak. So what he's saying there when he says no, he's saying, I don't have allegiance to either you or your enemies. So who would he have allegiance to? Another kingdom? You know, he goes on to explain that. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped and said to him, "What does my Lord say to his servant?" Joshua, in that short interchange, recognizes that this is somebody from God. This is nobody normal. This is not somebody coming from the city to provoke them. And the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, "Take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you're standing is holy." And Joshua did so. Now, right there, what does that tell you? That this is something extra special. When was the last time we saw something like this? Well, it was in Exodus, in chapter 3, verses 2 through 6, when Moses sees the burning bush. And he's intrigued by it, so he goes to check it out. And when he gets there, he hears, and the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, "I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned." When the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, "Moses, Moses." And he said, "Here I am." Then he said, "Do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground." And he said, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Now, I bring that up also with all those extra verses there, because in this instance, when Joshua has met this stranger, this commander of the Lord's army, we automatically go, who was that? And maybe we assume it was an angel. Well, they don't tell you specifically who this was, and I honestly cannot even infer exactly. In all the studying and reading I did, and even my own thoughts, it could be an angel sent from God. It could have been God himself in that form. It could have been Christ. All those opinions are out there, and nobody settles on one. My personal opinion, now that I stress this, my opinion only, that could be Christ. All right? Now, like I said, that's my opinion. It doesn't really matter going forward. All we know is this was a heavenly person, okay, who has come as commander of the Lord's army, Lord's hosts, which means the angels. Okay, so we've got the human commander of the Israelites, and we have the heavenly commander of the heavens hosts. Okay, that's a formidable army right there. So then the narrative goes on in chapter 6, verse 1. Now Jericho was shut up inside and outside because of the people of Israel. None went out and none came in. This city was in lockdown mode. They knew what was about to happen, and they're trying to protect themselves. If you go all the way back to Rahab, when she told the two spies, our hearts are melted, our spirits are weak. We're afraid. We have heard that your God has promised you our land. So that's what they're facing. And then they just got through witnessing or hearing the stories about the river that they depend on being stopped. Can you imagine the stories that were coming in? Wow, you should have seen it. The water just stopped flowing in it, and it just heaped up on itself. Okay, these stories were going throughout the land. But now this city that has a giant wall around it, it's got a massive protection system. So what do? You go through, you lock all the gates, shut all the windows, you're ready. They can't get in. Nobody's going to let them in because we know they're coming after us. So nobody's going in and out. They've stored up enough food, water, whatever they needed inside so that when the enemies come to lay siege on them, they can wait it out. And that was a common practice throughout the world. But God has a plan for that, and we're going to see that. And the Lord said to Joshua, verse 2 now, "See, I have given Jericho into your hand with its king and mighty men of valor." Even God is saying, these people in this city are warriors. They're going to fight. They're brave. "You shall march around the city, all the men of war going around the city once. Thus shall you do for 6 days. 7 priests shall bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark. On the 7th day you shall march around the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow the trumpets. And when they make a long blast with the ram's horn, when you hear the sound of the trumpet, then all the people shall shout with a great shout, and the wall of the city will fall down flat, and the people shall go up, everyone straight before him." There's a lot in there just to know about as we go into this. 7. 7 is a divine perfection number for God. It means this is something divine pertaining to God. Okay, and he doesn't just do 7 occasionally. He makes it throughout the whole thing. In the end, you're going to be marching around it 7 times. You're going to be blowing 7 trumpets. We see 777. Okay? All of that means that this entire thing is connected to God. So Joshua, the son of Nun, called the priests and said to them, "Take up the ark of the covenant, and let 7 priests bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord." Now, the ark of the covenant there is what? It's the presence of God. God is dwelling there. And he's going to be right in the middle of it. Okay, this is not, okay, put my ark over here and protect it, and you guys go on to the city. No, we're going to have the whole army and the Ark of the Covenant going right in there. Now, as I was reading through here and studying this, it kept reminding me of the time later on when the armies had taken the Ark of the Covenant into battle, and it was not sanctified by God. And what happens? This is farther in the future. They lose the Ark of the Covenant. Can you imagine that? So right there it tells you that this physical object can be lost in some circumstances. But for this battle in Jericho, God is in the middle of it. He's telling him what to do, and this is his plan. Let's see, I lost my place again. So Joshua the son of Nun called the priests and said to them, "Take up the Ark of the Covenant, and let 7 priests bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the Ark of the Lord." And he said to the people, "Go forward, march around the city, and let the armed men pass on before the Ark of the Lord." In other words, be in front. So there's going to be soldiers in front of the Ark. And just as Joshua had commanded the people, the 7 priests bearing the 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the Lord went forward, blowing the trumpets, with the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord following them. The armed men were walking before the priests who were blowing the trumpets, and the rear guard was walking after the ark, while the trumpets blew continually. Can you imagine the noise from those trumpets? These were not trumpets, musical instruments. These were horns for signaling. Do you remember the size of the camp, the size of the people itself? Overall, approximately, we estimate around, I believe it's 5 to 6 million people, men, women, children, and they have all the animals and all their dwellings and everything with them. Well, remember, they didn't have the telephone. Cell phones would have been really great at that time. But how did they communicate? These horns. So you have to have multiple ways of communicating. You can send a messenger, here, take this message and go over to this tribe and tell them what we're going to be doing. All right? But an even simpler way, keep it simple, are these horns. They're loud, and you can do signals. We do the same thing today. Okay? You can use a horn to signal. We use flags for signaling. All these things we know. Okay? At that time they were using horns. Even in battle, you could hear these horns through all the chaos and the clashing and the yelling and the animals and everything. You would hear the horns, and they would signal you. Go left, go right, move forward, retreat. Okay, so these people knew about this. So they were loud horns. Now they're using them to walk around this walled city, and they're blowing them. Now, in our eyes today, that seems kind of ridiculous. Okay, wow, that makes a good story. Well, again, God is showing them his power. He's saying, you're not doing this, I am. And here's how you're going to participate in it. Okay? This is the first battle going into the promised land. The very first one. Do you think God's going to take it easy? I mean, they've got more battles coming up. So not only does he have to bolster up his own people, he has to put fear into all the others throughout the land. So these horns are going around constantly blaring. The people inside the city are hearing this, and they're afraid. I'm sure a lot of them the soldiers especially, are peeking out over the wall or looking through little slits, going, what are they doing? They're just marching around, blowing these horns. And then we get even further into it. Verse 10. But Joshua commanded the people, you shall not shout or make your voice heard, neither shall any word go out of your mouth until the day I tell you to shout. He's telling them, silence. The only thing I want them to hear are are these horns and the crunch of your feet on that gravel. That's all they're going to hear. No talking, no gossiping, no whispering to your neighbor, hey, what do you think is going to come next? None of that. It's a very disciplined approach. And it has a purpose. Because not only is it scaring those inside the city, but it's also telling the Israelites something serious is happening here. And I want you to pay attention. So he caused the ark of the Lord to circle the city, going about it once. And they came into the camp and spent the night in the camp. So they did it and camped. This was not a continuous thing. Okay? If it was up to us, we would say, okay, we're going to circle it, and we're going to keep circling it, and then the next team is going to come in, and they're going to add on, and we're going to go take a break. We're going to really do this upright. Constant. But again, that's not the Lord's plan. He says, I want you to go around it once. Okay, can you imagine the soldiers going, what good is that? We're just going to do it one time? No, we need to overdo it. We need to keep going around and round. My wife accuses me of that when I go shopping. I don't need just one can of corn. I need 6. I overdo it. Okay, we have a tendency to that. Even in America, we go out to the restaurant, and how many times do we choose the buffet? We kind of overdo it a little bit, don't we? Too much is just right? Okay. So he caused the ark of the Lord to circle the city, going about it once. And they came into the camp and spent the night in the camp. Then Joshua arose early in the morning, and the priests took up the ark of the Lord. And the 7 priests, bearing the 7 trumpets of ram's horns before the ark of the Lord, walked on, and they blew the trumpets continually. And the armed men were walking before them, and the rear guard was walking after the ark of the Lord, while the trumpets blew continually. That was just the first day that they did the first round. Verse 14, and the second day they marched around the city once and returned into the camp. So they did for 6 days. So for 6 days they marched around this walled city one time. Blaring horns, nobody talking. Okay? Just take up your arms, follow the priests, and go. Talk about psychological warfare. All that noise, even that one time, for 6 days. How much can you take something annoying over and over and over before it just, in your mind, you start spinning it maybe, or you get anxious? Well, the people in this city are going through that. We even have modern day versions of this. Even up until about a year or so ago, North and South Korea did it to each other. They had giant speakers on towers blaring at each other. The North Koreans at the South Koreans towards the North, and a completely different message. The North Koreans were propaganda. The South Koreans were playing music, news, weather, pertinent things of the day, because they were trying to entice the enemies to defect, saying, hey, this is real life, it's better over here. Okay? And then within the past year or so, they came to an agreement to dismantle those speakers. But can you imagine that, even as a soldier, hearing that constantly? Well, the people inside the city of Jericho are listening to these trumpets. They weren't nice-sounding trumpets. I imagine they were, if you were in front of it, your ears were going to hurt. So these trumpets that were made for signaling and going into battle are going throughout the entire city. Even as they went around their wall, they could probably hear it on the far side of the city. So it's a constant reminder. But they only do it once. and then they stop. And then you got to wonder, well, are they going to start it again? What's coming next? This fear is building and building. On the seventh day, okay, remember that number 7. On the seventh day, they rose early at the dawn of day and marched around the city in the same manner 7 times. Can you imagine the people going, well, they've just made their once around. Oh, wait, they're going around again. Something's happening. We got to watch this. And at the 7th time, when the priests had blown the trumpets, Joshua said to the people, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." He's telling them, now's the time to make noise. And the city and all that is within it shall be devoted to the Lord for destruction. Devoted. Now, to us that sounds like a very positive, I am devoted to my wife. She is devoted to me. We use that term in a very positive way. But in the Bible, it means this is being given to God. This is God's completely. It doesn't belong to me. It belongs to God, the Creator. Okay? Devoted completely. We're not going to take back part of it. We're not going to keep part of it. Everything here is devoted, is given to God. All right? Because remember, this is the first city that they are attacking in the Promised Land. This is the start of it all. Only Rahab. Now, he's given them instructions, and you got to imagine the messengers are going out through there and telling everybody the same thing. Only Rahab, the prostitute, and all who are with her in her house shall live, because she hid the messengers whom we sent. They're keeping the promise they made. Okay, as long as she has what? That cord, that red cord hanging out of her window, so that they can tell where she's at. But you Israelites, you people, you Jews, listen up. But you keep yourselves from the things devoted to destruction. Okay, that's the first time we see devoted and destruction put together. And we're going to learn more about that later too. Lest, when you have devoted them, you take any of the devoted things and make the camp of Israel a thing for destruction and bring trouble upon it. He's telling them, resist the temptation. I know you're going to be going through this city. You're going to be destroying, killing, and there are going to be things there. There's going to be shiny objects that you want to take. Gold, silver, things of value. Maybe even just a necklace somebody has in their house. But he's saying, don't touch it for yourself. Resist the temptation. We're going to see in chapter 7 that doesn't work very well. Okay? Man's weakness comes back in there. Right? But he's telling him, this is not for you. Everything here is devoted to destruction for God. And God has a purpose for it. But all silver and gold and every vessel of bronze and iron are holy to the Lord. They shall go into the treasury of the Lord. So he's reminding them. So the people shouted, and the trumpets were blown. As soon as the people heard the sound of the trumpet, the people shouted a great shout, and the wall fell down flat, so that the people went up into the city, every man straight before him, and they captured the city. Then they devoted all in the city to destruction, both men and women, young and old, oxen, sheep, and donkeys, with the edge of the sword. They were told to go in there and wipe everything out. Every living person. Everything. All the animals. Chase after those chickens and kill them too. The cats, the dogs, the birds, the chickens, whatever was alive in that city was to be killed. And that's why they took Rahab and her family out. Take them out, put them near the Israelite camp. They're to be saved, but everything else is to be destroyed. And this has, now we here today, we go, ooh, that sounds really harsh. Why would our God, a God who is love, tell them to kill everything? It was a part of his plan at that time. He's given the Israelites a message. He's giving the enemies, all the other people in the land, I mean, they've got a lot of land to conquer. He's sending a message to them too. We can destroy you completely. You idolaters, you sinners, those of you that are not with God, we are going to destroy. That's a strong message to get out there. And everything of it belongs to who? Our Creator, the one who actually created all of us. So you got to see the power in that also, that God can make a command that destroy them. I'm not pleased with them. Now, we know later on also that there's even more in this, because what happens when you leave a little bit of yeast? It infects the whole recipe. It influences it. And God does not want his people influenced. He has just brought them out of Egypt, brought them through the desert, taken care of them, disciplined them, fed them, taken care of, and now he wants to put them in his promised land. These are his people, his children. And he doesn't want the neighborhood kids coming over and saying, hey, come on, I got something better over here. Hey, try this. Look at my gods. Because he knows that's going to happen. And we actually see that later on. All right? But God, now again, I compare it to parents. How many times have we been influenced by our best friend when we were growing up? How many times have we gotten into trouble because of a friend? We listened to them when we shouldn't have. Mom and dad's telling us, no, I don't want you to do that. And maybe we sneak around and, oh, but it looks like so much fun. That temptation, God's trying to keep them out of temptation later. But to the two men who had spied out the land, Joshua said, go into the prostitute's house and bring out from there the woman and all who belong to her, as you swore to her. So the young men who had been spies went in and brought out Rahab and her father and mother and brothers and all who belonged to her. And they brought all her relatives and put them outside the camp of Israel. Let's stop right there for a second. I think that's kind of significant. They didn't put her into the camp of Israel. They're still excluding her. Her and her family are safe, but they're on the outside. She's not a part of them at this time. And they burned the city with fire and everything in it. Only the silver and gold and the vessels of bronze and of iron they put into the treasury of the house of the Lord. But Rahab the prostitute and her father's household and all who belonged to her, Joshua saved alive. She has lived in Israel to this day because she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent out to spy Jericho. To this day. So at the time of this writing, her and all of her family were still with them. Okay, she was still being protected. As we get to the end there of the chapter in verse 26, Joshua laid an oath on them at that time, saying, cursed before the Lord be the man who rises up and rebuilds this city, Jericho. At the cost of his firstborn shall he lay its foundation, and at the cost of his youngest son shall he set up its gates. So he actually just cursed the city. All right? And you wonder, okay, what's going to happen? Well, we see that curse actually fulfilled. And the Bible says so in 1 Kings chapter 16 and verse 34. In his days, Hiel of Bethel built Jericho. He laid its foundation at the cost of Abraham, his firstborn, and set up its gates at the cost of his youngest son, Segub, according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke by Joshua the son of Nun. So what Joshua had said came from God cursing the city. It was meant to say, nobody is going to rebuild this. Now, diving into that a little bit more, what was meant was these walls are not going to be rebuilt. These huge, thick fortification walls that could stop anybody except for the Lord. Now, I know there's all kinds of theories and everything as they're marching around and blowing their trumpets. And then on the seventh day, their voices are added in, and it creates harmonics that vibrate the wall and it crumbles. Why do we have to go into these theories and these well, how did that happen? Why can we not just believe that God made it happen? I don't need the specifics of the physics and the engineering of how he made that happen. I don't need to know how he made the water stop or how he divided the water. All I need to know is that he did that. He is that powerful. And that's what he's showing the Israelites here. You didn't even touch the wall. I, God, made it crumble. I scared those inhabitants so that their fear was at its max. I made chaos in there, and then at the opportune time when I wanted in my plan, I breached that wall so that you could enter that city. I can see, I don't know if the entire wall crumbled. I don't know if it was sections. I don't know those things, and I don't have to. My faith doesn't depend on that part of the story. My faith says, my God can do amazing things. My God is powerful. And that's what he's showing the Israelite people. Because how many times have they already forgotten when God has fed them, gave them water, taken care of them? How many times have our children forgot that same thing? How many times have we thought, I am going to stop feeding you? Okay? We have these thoughts as parents, admit it. Okay? We get annoyed, we get irritated. God's done the same thing to his children. They have done actions against him to make him angry. But he still loves them so much that he carries them through. Disciplines them? Yes. Just as we would. So right now, he's trying to set them up. This is the first step into the promised land. I'm going to get you ready for your new life. And we're going to take out all these neighborhood bad people. Because I want you to start out right. A new life. I want you to remember who I am, to think on me and my power, and I'm going to show you. At the same time, I'm also going to scare the entire people in the other countries that we're going to be marching into and taking. Okay, so there's so many multiple messages there. And all of it is part of God's plan. In my mind, I see the walls crumbling, the armies running in to do what God has told them. I don't think it was pleasant. I don't think, in my mind, I think even the soldiers probably found it distasteful, but they were commanded to do it for a reason. Okay? Resist the temptation, wipe out all the unbelievers. It had a purpose. Now, that's not our purpose today. As Christians, we are a people of love in our heart for all. Jesus came and said, okay, the old law has passed. Now we're taking God's love to everybody. Okay, we're including everyone. We are no longer just a nation of Jews. We are now a nation globally. Doesn't matter your race, doesn't matter your culture, doesn't matter your country. None of that matters now. We're all one. And he wants all of us as his children. And that's the next step, is becoming a child of God. And Jesus sets that up for us, okay, going forward. So how do we treat the enemies? How do we treat those outside? We treat them with love. We treat them with respect, because we're trying to pull them in. We are no longer going out to destroy. We are no longer going out to exclude. We are no longer going out going, you're not a part of God's body? You're going to hell. No, that's not what we're doing. That's not what we're about. We still have to be separate from the world, but we are still in the world. We work here, we live here, we play here, our families grow up, go out to school, all of that. But we ourselves in our hearts have to know what the difference is. That we are not excluding or tearing down people anymore. Keep that in mind. Okay, we are going to end right there. Oh, the very last verse. I'm sorry, I don't think I read that. So the Lord was with Joshua, and his fame was in all the land. So word of this is spreading throughout there. And do you remember in the previous chapters what God had said? I am going to exalt Joshua. I'm going to raise him up just like I did Moses. That verse right there says it. His fame was in all the land. He's commander of God's earthly army. And we're going to see that more even later. Okay, we end there. Next week's chapter 7. So please catch up, read chapter 7. I would even say go past that. Get the full context of it, okay? Because all the chapters fit in together, what's happening and going on there, and so you look at both shoulders and the middle and get the entire story. I will see you next Sunday morning.